The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS, the Voice of Stockton, or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
And good evening. This is Bruce Judici with Peace and Justice Connections on the air with Cleveland School Remembers folks who are going to be having a commemoration a couple nights from now. Cleveland School Remembers on the 30th anniversary of the Cleveland school shootings. Thursday, January 17th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Civic Auditorium. And so welcome you all. This is going to be it's going to be quite a commemoration. It's a turning point, I'm hoping, for this issue. And so who we have here is Adrian Egelin, Julie Shard, and Judy Weldon, all from Cleveland School Remembers. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, anyway, we want to sort of, I think last time we had you here a few months ago, it was before an election, and it seems that gun issues have sort of turned a corner, and we're getting more into what people would say is progress. But we on Thursday night we're going to be remembering what happened 30 years ago. And so for the folks who who didn't hear that show then, could one of you say what we're remembering about Cleveland School, what happened 30 years ago, and what's going to happen on Thursday?
Sure. 30 years ago, a gunman came onto the campus of Cleveland Elementary School right here in Stockton.
And that's right at the corner of Fulton and El Dorado.
Correct.
Pretty much.
Yes. And fired off an automatic weapon and killed 5 children and wounded approximately 30 others, including a teacher. Also wounding the hearts of most of Stockton and most of the country at the same time. So on Thursday this week, January 17th, which is the 30th anniversary, we will be commemorating those lives lost and the survivors, but also welcoming the survivors and loved ones of other gun violence victims from the area. So it's an open memorial commemoration. Pretty much in 25 words or less.
Yeah, right. So, and that'll be, again, Thursday, the 17th, January 17th, from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Stockton Civic Auditorium right downtown off of Martin Luther King Square, pretty much on, I guess, El Dorado and, I don't know.
Center
Right,
Street,
exactly. Yeah, the auditorium.
Yes,
right.
Civic Auditorium.
Yeah, excellent. So, so what do we have, what's planned?
Well, we have we think, a wonderful program that reflects the community, reflects the families who have been impacted, and will also bring a message of hope. You know, we talk about hope rising like a phoenix out of things like this, and so we're hopeful that the program is going to give the public what they would like to see as far as acknowledging and honoring the memory of the victims, and not just the 5 children we lost at Cleveland School, but also the hundreds of victims we've had in Stockton since that time.
Right, victims of gun violence.
Victims, the victims of gun violence.
Killed and wounded.
Yes, killed and wounded, because sometimes people forget that, you know, we know that there are numbers associated with people who are killed, but then those people who are wounded carry the scars with them throughout life, sometimes needing care for the rest of their lives, suffering post-traumatic stress disorder, being constantly on edge and things like that. Right. So it's a complex issue, but this program we think is a good program. Patrick Johnston, who was our assembly member at the time, is going to be speaking.
Wow! And
it's interesting because he reconnected with us partly because he's on the board of the Children's Museum, which we'd like to talk to you about a little bit later, because the Children's Museum came about because of the shooting. Dr. John Dacey, who is, excuse me, the superintendent of Stockton Unified, is going to be a speaker. And then at the end of the program, District Attorney Tori Verber Salazar is going to say a few words. And then within the program, we have some children who are grown up now, who were at the school at the time, are going to be speaking. We have some musical numbers. The Stockton Khmer Ballet is going to be performing. Do you want me to keep going? Because it's a really full program.
Please.
Okay.
I mean, because I think a lot of people would want to come out and they want to remember what has happened and make certain that it never happens again. I think by going to these events, it really drills it home to you to say, it's important. It's very important for us to make things change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
The solemnity of the event is going to be acknowledged by the Buddhist monks of the Cambodian temple are going to be there.
And Cambodians
actually, our event is being done in partnership with the Office of Violence Prevention and APSARA, which is the Asian Pacific
Self-development.
Here we go.
Oh, yeah.
Self-Development and Residential Association. Thank you. We've known it as APSARA for a long time.
And Park Village, is that
Park
still?
Village.
Okay, which is really close to.
It's very
Cleveland's Park.
close, and
it's right next to Oak Park.
our students, I think at least 4 of the 5 students who were killed lived at Park Village, and as a result of what happened, Park Village was given some funds and has built itself up, and so it's not just Park Village Apartments anymore, but it's also APSARA, which supports the Southeast Asian community in many ways.
And so the reason why you're talking about Southeast Asians and Cambodians was because this Cleveland school at the time, and I don't know if it's still the case, but was primarily a Southeast Asian population of students. And I don't know if there was a designation of a hate crime back then and 30 years ago, but this would definitely count as being a hate crime where you have specific people targeted. And and most of them were Cambodian children who were targeted and who were Cambodian and Laotian, maybe Hmong as well. I'm not. Is that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes. There were a lot of Cambodian students at the school that year, and there was a good number of Vietnamese.
Okay.
And
were any of you on the schools at that on that day?
We were all
All
there.
three
You
of
were
us.
all three.
All
Okay.
3 of us were
Okay.
there.
All 3 were there.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, on the program, so there's going to be the Buddhist monk, the Buddhist from the Cambodian temple.
From their
Temple.
temple, they're going to do a special ceremony toward the beginning, and then the program is varied. But we'll have some speakers, including some survivors, some music. Cesar Chavez High School is going to be well represented there with their jazz choir, going to be doing an a cappella number, and then their mariachi band is going to be closing the event with a mariachi presentation. So I think it's going to be a really nice program. What I like about it, I think what we tried to plan is to make it forward looking. We lost some children, and so they will be represented by some of the survivors, but then we'll be seeing high school kids who represent hope, especially after what happened with the Parkland shooting almost a year ago, and with their activism. We've become especially aware that young people not only have something important to say, they also need to be heard and represented. So we hope we're going to have, we think we're going to have a youth.
And those young people are making sure that they're being heard.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
right.
some people
So-
would say that the results of the recent election were in some part due to the Parkland shooting and people listening to the kids there and saying, enough is enough.
Wasn't that something?
Yeah.
The general citizenry has finally listened and taken steps, and the election was the perfect timing. The timing was just right for that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, when this hit 30 years ago, it wasn't like every 3 months there was a mass shooting. I mean, this was like pretty early on in the mass shooting trend, and so I think there just builds up in people a certain amount of. I mean, I guess some people would say, oh yeah, it's just like another natural disaster. But I think for young people, they're not so patient.
They're not patient, and they're fearful. Whenever we go to an event where there are young people, high school kids especially, they tell us how frightened they are to go into a classroom, to go into a school. Last year we went to Sacramento for, I forget what that was, bills going through, and there were a lot of young people giving testimony of what's going on in their schools. And every single student, I think we listened to about 8 students, everyone told of this real deep-seated fear that they know that it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to our school, it's when it's going to happen. And when you look at the numbers of children who are going to school feeling like that every day, is that how we should be bringing up our children?
Yeah.
Is that the right way in this America?
Yeah.
To have our children that frightened?
Yeah, well, it used to be that these, after the Sandy Hook shooting, the idea was that, well, this is it. This is the one that is going to make Congress, pass something, and nothing happened. And it was, and people just sort of waited it out until the next shooting. And then the next shooting happened, and then it was just like there was this inertia, there was this fear that the NRA could just about, if anybody stuck their head up, they would be primaried and they would be dumped out by somebody who's even much more gun oriented than the existing people. But this last election, that didn't happen.
Well, what happened was if they weren't primary, they lost the election. It happened south of us in California District 10 when Josh Harder beat Jeff Denham, and that was a real squeaker. But Josh Harder was cautious but strong about gun violence prevention, and Jeff Denham, representing that segment of his district, had to be cautious in a different way. And we tried several times with our colleagues down there to meet with him to try to get him on the same side, or at least listen to our concerns about gun violence and encourage him to think differently about it. And he refused to meet with us. Yeah. So Josh Harder was one person, but then in Georgia, Lucy McBath, whose son was killed about 4 years ago, I guess, was encouraged to run, and she won. And the main platform, the main thing that she was promulgating was gun violence prevention.
That was her issue.
That was her issue, and it was high on the list for a lot of those people who were elected unexpectedly.
Well, there was huge turnout.
Yeah.
A lot of people came out. I read somewhere that the NRA was actually outspent this year. But the strength in NRA has never really been so much in its spending, but it's been in its membership, and it's been its inability to have tons of members. And I don't know if they just didn't turn out, or if the people who are convinced that we have enough of this gun violence just turned out even more.
Well, they have millions of members, but 70% of the membership of the NRA would like to see a strong background check bill. But it's those few
very
militant, very vocal people who misunderstand the Second Amendment, who voice their opinions, and if they are told to write letters, if they're told to call, they do it. And so that's made a difference.
There are lots of ways that the NRA works, and it does come down to money a lot of the time, but they will do things in communities that undermines either the next election or voters' preferences, things that we couldn't even imagine, and one small step at a time, and they keep doing that, and pretty soon it's an onslaught basically. So I really think that the election was a strong indication of change, and the fact that not just schools anymore are being targeted. When you go to a concert, I heard that there were so many people that went to the Las Vegas concert had also been in a Southern California shooting in the same right there at the same time. Thousand Oaks.
Yeah, Thousand Oaks. Right. They experienced the same The same twice.
I mean, I can't even imagine having to flee from bullets. I did not have to flee from bullets. And I can't imagine that feeling. And here we have people who have been in two places, not during war. This is during peacetime in our country.
Right.
And they're having to flee from bullets at a concert.
Right.
And then at Thousand Oaks, California, again having to do it. It's crushing. It's a crushing blow to.
Yeah. Well, let me just have a quick break. This is Bruce Judici with Peace and Justice Connections. We're discussing Cleveland School Remembers, a commemoration that is going to be happening down in downtown Stockton at the Stockton Memorial Civic Auditorium from 6 to 8 p.m. on Thursday, the 17th of January. And we're here with Adrian Egeland, Judy Weldon, and Julie Shart, who are members of the Cleveland School Remembers Group. I'm sort of struck by, I don't know if this feeling about, trying to take back the safety of our streets by, cutting back on the number of guns isn't tied to the fact that a lot of these shootings are now happening in suburban areas where, that seems to be where a lot of the elections were turning, where people are now starting to feel that they're not so, people fled to the suburbs to be safe. Mm-hmm. And now it's like there is no place to be safe, so, I think it's to be commended that, in Stockton, the number of gun deaths and gun violence had decreased last year.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's a function of the economy or if it's just a function of the awareness of people to say that, enough is enough.
2 years in a row, mm-hmm. that number has gone down. It was down
from
40% or something like that this year, and it was 33% last year. Yeah. And I'm not sure why, but it's not that way in other similar communities. And I think. I hate to say when you don't know for sure, because I think data and statistics would be really important in a case like this. Definitely. But there are things going on here, including the good working relationship that the police department has with the community, with the mayor's office, the things that our mayor is trying to do, and the efforts of other people like the Office of Violence Prevention, peacekeepers, and things like that. So I think, like with many really complex issues, all those little parts are starting to work together. But I also know that California has very strong gun laws, among the strongest in the nation, and so we look at the statistics in California, and there are fewer gun-related incidents, probably because we have stronger laws. So.
But also, I don't know if, it's strange that when the law passed to try to release the pressure on our prisons, and because the prisons were just bulging at the seams, and there had to be something done, and so a lot of folks who were given early release for drug crimes or for things that weren't violent, they were set free. And it's strange that, at a time when, that's happened, and the cry was, oh my gosh, we're going to, see all this crime. We're going to see all that, run for your lives, lock your doors. I understand that there is a bump up in burglaries and some other crimes, but it's nowhere near the number of, that was claimed by the opposition. And I'm just wondering if just treating people more fairly has anything to do with, the decrease in crime or the decrease in violent.
I think there are a lot of programs in place to help those people who were exiting prisons. Right. For example, Friends Outside, when they have complete wraparound services for people, and you can't address the needs of everybody, but it's probably one of those programs that's helped that statistic.
There are a lot, and I think you can't nail down one or two or even 10 different things that contribute. I think, as Julie said, there are many different programs and relationships with the mayor's office and his push to improve South Stockton.
Yeah.
That's a big deal for everybody that lives in South Stockton, especially. Yeah. And when you talk about prison reform, and let's not bring a simple person who's smoking weed to prison,
Right.
let's see if we can, do something else
Right.
with that person.
Right.
So when we look at that now, I think that's going to make a lot of difference in the
Down the
very
road.
new,
Right.
very near future. With our new governor, I don't think as many people will be going to prison for those
Right.
kinds of charges,
Right.
nor should they.
Right.
Oops.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I think that's the way things are going. I think, and things are moving in the right direction. I think, I mean, and if in Stockton, if we continue to respect other people in this community, I think we're gonna, it's gonna reap some rewards. You just mentioned the governor. Now. This governor has been, I think his record on gun violence has been pretty strong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's been a person who has pushed for the legislation that decrease the size of magazines and other sorts of gun control issues. So. And he has majorities in both houses of the legislature, so we can probably expect more coming from the state in the coming year.
He's going to be putting more funding with some of the legislation that's happening, and he's very supportive of the efforts of grassroots and other organizations and efforts to decrease gun violence. Things like making sure the Department of Justice has enough money to deal with the prohibited people. When there's a list of people who should not have firearms,
Right.
but you need to have DOJ people have the funding to go after people like that. So that's an issue right now. But yeah, he's really been on our side.
Yeah.
But I also want to mention we're here because of Cleveland School Remembers, but
Right.
we can't forget the fact that mass shootings make the news, but we don't want to forget those people who die every day
Right.
to gun violence for
Right.
other reasons, either
Right.
because of an issue on the street or a mishandled weapon or suicides. Suicides account for
Right.
almost 60% of gun deaths.
Right. And when you hear news stories about gun violence, you almost never hear anything mentioned about how many guns there are in this country, how many, what the uses of, the guns that were used, what are they used for? They're not, people say, oh, we use it for hunting. Of course, I use my Glock, this, that, or the other for, what are you hunting? You're just hunting people. That's all those guns are good for. And it's every day there's a gun. If of course if it bleeds, it leads. You see it every night on the TV news, on the local TV news. A gun being used, a gun being used, a gun being used, and then and once in a while a peace officer is killed, and then and then all the gun rights people rise up and say, well, everybody should have a gun, and it's those darn undocumented people who are all shooting people. It's like, no, it's the gun. It's how many guns are out there. I don't know what the statistics are, but the number of guns that are in the hands of people is just way out of proportion to any place else on earth.
Correct. Any place else on earth. And even if guns were practically eliminated, you can't take guns away from people who own them already. That isn't going to happen. It's not realistic. But any other country in the world, in 1 year, for instance, Great Britain, I think they had 8 gun deaths for the entire year. And we in our country are dealing with more than 30,000 in a year. So, and Great Britain is not the only place in the world with those small numbers. Most other countries have those kinds of numbers. Yeah. But our country was based on freedoms and rights, and those rights now get pushed further and further forward. So they and people are, or they aim to tighten them up so that you know, if somebody says, well, you're only allowed to own one gun, and the gun owner is going to say, but no, I have other things to do with my guns. You know, it's
well, I mean, I have friends and relatives who have many guns. They say, why do you need so many guns? Well, I just like to have them. Well, you know, that's kind of a luxury that a lot of people, you know, that we just can't afford to have. I mean, you just can't. You know, when there's this many gun violence, I mean, maybe you can think of that luxury if we have if we're down to Britain's level of gun deaths, but we're not there. I mean, and you know, we can talk about mental health services, but you know, even given the perfect amount of mental health services, still. There are just too many out there for accidents, for suicide, for any sort of way for people to use those. And you know, I mean, what my economic basis training would say is that what you do is, if you want people to not use something, increase the price. So what you could do is you could put like $100 tax per bullet. And I think I saw a comedian say that, you know, said, well, you know, if it cost $100 for a bullet, you know, and you start saying, well, I'm going to shoot you, and it's like, well, gee, you know, $100, you know, I got to think about whether or not I can afford to shoot you. And so you know, and that's one way to. I mean, if the guns are already out there, you're right, and people aren't going to have their guns taken away. But
I think if we could have better exchanges through discussions instead of it being such a political issue, that sometimes that would help. And I have a friend that I have been discussing this with ever since we formed, because he is a proud gun owner and is very has been very opposed to any of his rights to own a gun taken away, and has come from a fearful place. On that, because he's afraid of losing rights. But
has he ever been threatened, or does he use it to protect himself, or is it like it's just a rights thing?
I'm haven't asked.
Yeah.
I'll have to ask.
Yeah.
But and he feels that he is helping to protect the neighborhood because he has a gun. But he has recently made a statement in a conversation that we had that things are different now than when he was young. When young people were growing up in our community, when I wasn't here, but in our community, they used guns in the same way that the little boy in the Christmas Story would have. You know, the BB gun. That's the theme of the movie.
Take your eye out.
But you know, what was he going to shoot with that gun? And so he and this friend of mine, he and his friends all had guns, and felt they needed to learn to use them. And then possibly many of those friends of his grew up to be hunters, and that's important to them. But he started to see that there's a different kind of environment where the guns are causing damage. And so
those aren't hunters out there.
It makes him think of it differently, which is a start.
Well, that is a turnaround, because you know I grew up. I talked to you guys before about, you know, growing up in a hunting family, and you know the idea is, you know, that, you know, hunter safety. You're very careful. You know, you use long guns. You know, you don't shoot unless you know what you're shooting at. It's normally a deer or something, and you know, you're very careful about it. But the mindset of what we see, and I don't know how it doesn't sink into people when they see that those people who are leading the nightly news, those aren't hunters. Those aren't people who are really too concerned about where their bullets go. I mean, they didn't go to hunter safety training. You know, it's there has to be an understanding that is a problem. You know, and maybe it's an urban problem. I say, oh, you know, I don't live in downtown anywhere. You know, I live out here in the suburbs, and it's a safe place. But you know, I think you're right in terms of more people, and that's what it takes. Is it takes some dialogue rather than just saying, oh, those those people who are just, clinging to their guns or whatever Obama said, the thing that got plastered to his forehead. And that, talking to folks and saying, really, you got to know this is a problem. I mean, you got to know that people are dying here.
Yeah, well, there are many levels to the problem, and part of our message is to remind the public about things that seem pretty obvious to us, but people forget that safe storage of a firearm, locking your gun separately from your ammunition because of the things that can happen incidentally, unintentionally, or intentionally. For example, if in a household where there's a firearm, don't ever think because you told your 7-year-old kids to stay away from guns, or they don't know that you have guns, because remember what it was like when you were growing up and you wanted to find where the Christmas gifts are.
Right.
Most households, and I think it's a huge statistics, parents are astounded to find out they think that their kids don't know that they have a firearm or where it is. Kids know where they are, and they're curious, and they get to them. Or there's the case of somebody who, like a teenager whose heart is broken, and he only thinks that there's one way to solve his problem right now. Most self-inflicted gun deaths, suicides, that decision is made almost instantaneously. People might work up to that, but that decision happens just right away. So we like to talk to the public about safe storage, being aware of where people are mentally and emotionally and things like that.
Right. Yeah, because the $100 bullet wouldn't help in that case. But I do know folks who have like a lot of stockpiled ammunition, especially after Obama was elected. I mean, my gosh, he was great for sales, and now that Trump's been elected, Remington went bankrupt,
right?
and now actually Trump, who is probably the only good thing he's done, he made bump stocks illegal, but you would think that would have been obvious right after the Las Vegas shooting. You would think that would have been, the next day. But I think it took like 6 months, and there's probably some sort of political purpose.
Almost a year.
Yeah, most likely. Could we go back to the event on Thursday? I wanted to mention really quickly.
Now, the event on Thursday is going to be the 30th anniversary of the Cleveland school shooting, remembering victims of gun violence. And that's going to be on Thursday, January 17th from 6 to 8, Stockton Memorial Civic Auditorium. Yes, that event.
That event.
Yes.
And also that very same day, Central United Methodist Church is opening their sanctuary to the general public from 11 in the morning until 1 p.m. for quiet reflection or prayers or just being in a quiet space.
And Central Methodist is close to Cleveland School and was really important in those days.
Absolutely, and it's on Pacific Avenue, right across from UOP. Right. So they're very. They have a large Cambodian population, and they still work very closely with Cleveland School and doing family things with the families there at the school. Yeah. Even though the population has changed at the school. So it'll be it's a nice gesture for the church to offer that sanctuary.
Yeah.
So
quite a remembrance. I mean, it was just so shocking, that time, 30 years ago. And there were a lot of people who are here now who weren't here then. And it's worth remembering for not just that it happened here in Stockton 30 years ago, but like you're saying, it's not just for Stockton. It's to remember the victims of gun violence everywhere. And unfortunately, it could happen anywhere. It could happen in Stockton again. It could happen if we're not vigilant, if we're not. If we don't talk with our neighbors, if we don't get to know our neighbors, we could end up repeating something like this. So, anyway, I wanted to. You mentioned that you wanted to talk about the Children's Museum, because the Children's Museum was something that did come out of the Cleveland school shooting. And so how did the Children's Museum get started, and what's happening now there?
Janet Ging was a second grade teacher who was wounded during the incident at Cleveland School, very severely wounded. And she didn't even come back to teach the rest of that year. It took her so long to try to recover. And but she and her husband had 2 sons, and they did a lot of traveling. And when they traveled, they always found the places their own sons liked to go. She remembered about children's museums, and so with that in mind, she felt that one way to take this horrible incident and turn it into something positive was to establish a children's museum here in Stockton. And did she meet first with Diane Beatrice about it, or?
I'm not sure the actual progression of events there, and even the funding. I think the funding was mostly separate donations. The city, there were donations coming from all over the world to help take care of the families and the students. But I'm not sure that any of that, I think it was separate donations and fundraising that began, and her thinking, her desire was to have a fun place in Stockton for children to go. And that has now since been realized. It's an incredible place.
And
it is.
And where's it located?
It is located on Weber. Across from the waterfront warehouse. And there's a huge mural painted on the front of it, so you can't help but identify it. That's right, the soldiers standing out in front of there. And they're going to be having their 25th...
The toy soldiers.
Toy soldiers, yes. It's a safe place because it's toy soldiers. They're going to be having their 25th anniversary of the Children's Museum on June 22nd.
Okay.
But it's a wonderful place to visit. I haven't been there for a few years because we took our children and then we took our grandchildren, and they're a little bit older than that now. But Dr. Dacey, the Stockton Unified superintendent, visited the Children's Museum early on when he moved here, and then when his grandchildren came to visit a while back, he took his grandchildren there and didn't realize until that time that the Children's Museum came out of the shooting incident in Cleveland at Cleveland School. So it's a very important part of the community, and we're glad it's still there. It's thriving.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a destination for families with kids.
And your group, Cleveland School Remembers, has put on the past couple of years an art show that has been like second to none. And that was, I don't know if you were even involved with that.
Oh, we lived and breathed it for months.
And that was in the past couple summers, right? Down at the
we actually did three.
Three, I'm sorry.
The first one was held at the Mexican Heritage Center.
Right downtown.
Right. And then the market, and then the last 2 were at the fairgrounds at the Plant and Flower Building. Right. So, and those were pretty spectacular art events. And people are still asking, are we going to do it again?
That's quite an undertaking. It was like 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, you had that was a month. It was a month.
Whole month.
Yeah, that's a long.
Did not happen in 2018. Okay. It was the 3 years
prior.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, but people still think we should continue to do it.
Right.
Sure. Well, the thing is that people who come to this event, maybe they'll become inspired to help out. Because the thing is an event
Could
like
you say that again?
Yeah.
We would love it.
Yes, because the membership of Cleveland School Remembers isn't just merely people who were present on the day. Right? I mean, there are people who are interested in making a positive change with respect to gun violence in Stockton and the greater community, right?
That's correct. But still, there are only 10 of us that are active, 8, 9, 10 on any given day.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Also, we have been neglecting to say that we are a California chapter of the Brady campaign to prevent gun violence. We must say that because we are. Yes. And we do work helping Brady's position in the country. What their campaign is also our campaign.
And the Brady campaign came out of? Jim Brady was,
Yes.
who was Jim
He was the
Brady?
press secretary for Ronald Reagan, and when Reagan was shot in 1980, he took a bullet, and as did James Brady. And James Brady didn't recover as well as President Reagan did, and he was paralyzed, I think, from the waist down. But he and his wife Sarah Brady, very soon after that, formed the Brady organization to work on gun violence prevention, which was really interesting because
Yes.
he was very, you know, was a very Republican.
Yeah.
But
And Republicans, I mean, not
but
to put down Republicans,
not
but the
at
thing
all.
is
That's-
Republicans are
the
normally tied to being
politics of that party has
gun rights.
changed. But he saw the need, and even President Reagan himself felt that gun violence prevention was an important issue. So that's where the
Because
Brady
gun violence
organizations-
prevention and public safety is not a political issue.
Right.
In today's climate, it has
Right.
become that way.
Yeah, right.
But it should not be, we should be talking about public safety. We should be talking about gun
Yeah.
violence prevention
Right.
aside from what
Right.
your voting preference is.
Yeah, it's pretty pathetic when an issue like gun safety has to be politicized and just in order to drum up some votes, just so you can get a wedge issue that allows you to get elected. It says it's essentially you're I don't know. To me, you're running on hate when you're talking about gun violence and saying, well, yes, I'm I have 20 guns, and I just hope nobody takes them from me and shoots me.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. I just think that the more we talk with people, the more we talk about common sense regulation. There's a lot of people who will listen to us, and well, in the last election really showed it. It's just the information just has to keep on coming. I'm just concerned that an event might be concocted or come up with where people feel like they have to have guns, but I don't know. I think the tide is turning. I think young people,
Well,
I'm also
go ahead.
waiting for some of the legislation that has happened in recent years just to come into play, because a lot of the things that pass don't take
right.
effect immediately, and when it starts showing that we can have a change in our society about gun deaths and the danger of guns
Right.
without taking people's rights away, then I think people will be listening in a
Right.
different way too.
Right. You were going to say?
I was just going to say that the other organizations we work with, the partnerships we've made, nobody wants to take anybody's gun away, and I think everybody, gun owners and the rest of us, can agree, that you can have your firearm, but we all agree we want a safe community. We want our kids to be safe. We want to make sure that our veterans are safe, because there's an issue with suicide by gun in the veterans.
Right.
So
Right.
I think we can all agree that there's things that we can do together, and we've found that because in some of the things we've been doing, we've had some gun owners come and work with us because they agree on the end goal with us, and it's important to have that voice at the table.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because the mass shootings, the big events that that take up, they're covered by the media for days and days and days. Those are, I don't know if they just overshadow the day-to-day. One person shot, the other person shot. I mean, look at the and in Stockton, thankfully, it's less, but you look in the police blotter in Stockton, and you say, somebody gets shot. I mean, maybe they're not killed, but the thing is that there's the use of a gun, or the threat of a gun, or people being robbed by a gun. I mean,
Right.
guns are in use, and in a way that I don't know if gun advocates really appreciate.
There are ways to take a look at the issue, and I brought up data and statistics before. We are real fans of looking at data and looking at
Sure.
statistics and things like that. And we have at UC Davis, Dr. Garen Wintemute, and we probably talked about him before, runs their Department of Gun Violence Research.
And that's
they're looking at
the first gun violence research study group that's in the nation, right?
Well, it is, except that Johns Hopkins University has done some studies and things like that. But because the funding for that kind of research was cut off, I mean, the money that existed 20 years ago to look at gun violence is still the only amount that exists. But because we're California, Dr. Wintemuth spent years and years using his own money to do research about just such a thing. But thanks partly to Gavin Newsom when he's a lieutenant governor and working with Governor Brown to encourage him to support our own state legislature giving funding, $1 million a year, so that he can do his job. So now this is a man who is also a gun owner. Dr. Wintemuth is a gun owner. He's a member of the NRA. He's also very much a scientist, so he looks at things very closely. And if he sees that his statistics are equivocating a little bit, he said, we're not even going to approach that until we can find the science to back it. One of the things that's come out of his study is the close relationship, the correlation between alcohol abuse and gun violence. And for example, somebody who has gotten to DUI, it's that person is more likely to be on the track to commit violence with a gun than somebody else. And so as a result of that, Hannah Beth Jackson, who is a senator from the Santa Barbara area, has put forth a law again, and we're hoping that it's going to be a bill that's going to be passed by both houses of our legislature, saying that if you have 2 DUIs, then your firearms need to be removed for a certain amount of time. Those details are being worked out.
Wow.
But this just goes to the kind of research that Dr. Wintemuth and his staff are doing, and the results we can get from that. And we can say, look, we've got the statistics, and this is a person who is very strict about how he uses his science and his statistics.
So we are benefiting now from his research.
Yes.
And earlier we talked about the NRA and how I usually say they go in through the back door. Well, the CDC has been...
which is the
Centers for Disease
Control.
Exactly.
They used to do research of gun violence, and it was cut off. That funding that Julie mentioned earlier was cut off because the NRA was paying through their lobbyists, legislators, to say, well, we don't really need that legislation, so why would you vote for that?
Yeah.
So
we don't need to study that.
We don't need to study that. We don't need that.
And
so
that it's not a medical issue. That was their argument.
So, those little things that they do that we, it's not broadly broadcast, but it happens constantly. It's through the back door that we don't even know is happening.
That's right.
And
there's just so much news and there's so many things happening, and that's one of those things that would be like a little short on page 15 or something on the bottom of the paper saying, the thing is if the legislation dies, I mean, who's going to notice, right? And then you find out, a lack of information. How is that going to be news? I mean, how can you report on something that isn't there?
Right.
And so that is the concern. This is Peace and Justice Connections Radio with Cleveland School members, Adrian Egeland, Judy Weldon, and Julie Shart. We're talking about the prelude to the Cleveland School shooting commemoration, remembering victims of gun violence on Thursday, January 17th. It's just a few days from now, from 6 to 8, down at the Stockton Civic Auditorium, right downtown. Is there anything more on the program that we can mention that we had before? It sounds like it's going to be a pretty full schedule. There's going to be some music. There's going to be some dignitaries. Talking about the importance of remembering this, this event.
Yes, yeah, I think it's a balanced program with the speakers and the performances and
survivors.
Survivors who are going to be speaking. 2 of them are going to be speaking. I think we can mention Sinath. Mike Van is a survivor, and he works with the YMCA now, San Joaquin YMCA, and he made the decision early on that he wanted to give back to his community, and he feels that his experience there has led him to work on making his community a better place, and he's a wonderful man. And then Kung Wen, who is now a counselor at one of our high schools, at Edison High School, also a survivor, is going to be speaking. And can you talk about With Our Words? I saw you pointed out. Okay. Oh, I would like
You
to
can
mention.
better.
Okay, With Our Words, which is the youth poetry slam group,
Right.
overseen. I
Right.
won't say run, but kind of overseen by the wonderful Tama Brisbane,
Right.
who is our poet
Poet
laureate.
yeah.
And I have to say,
That'll be great.
it will
Yeah.
be fantastic.
Yeah.
Every time we've seen poetry presentation by this group, it's been
Yes.
spot on. And
I
they did a presentation at a town hall we did in August, and did a wonderful job. And when we contacted Tama, we said, we love that poem. If they want to do it again, she said, oh no, my kids always want to make something,
Yeah.
create something new, and
Right.
we don't know what it's going to be. We
Right.
know it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So you have to be there because you
Yeah.
never
you
get
have to
see
You know,
be
it.
there.
and-
That's true.
And I hate to admit getting older, but I am getting older, and it is inspiring to see young folks come up and pick up the issues in a way that is important to them, and a way that speaks to them, and isn't just ignoring that the issue is there. I mean, where people are just looking at us straight on and saying, we're going to do something here. And With Our Words, they have some pretty, they're out there. So I'd love to hear them.
Good.
I will love to hear
Good.
them.
Okay,
Great.
good. That's good to know. Yeah. Sounds like you're going to be there.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Earlier we spoke about the fact that this is a memorial, but it's also encouraging the audience and to look forward and with hope.
Right.
And all of these young people help us to do that. The students from With Our Words, even our survivors, every year they give me hope, because so many of the students that graduated from Cleveland Elementary School and went on are in social work type positions, working for the
Like they're teaching.
they're teaching.
yes.
They're at the YMCA. They're counselors. They're social workers working with the human trafficking section. So those kinds of things make us feel like there really is hope, because these kids came from a dark place, a dark day, and yet they have moved forward. Yes, they've moved on, but they still carry that little bit of pain, because that doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And you'll hear that
Yeah.
in some of their stories.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a powerful evening.
I think in these days, this. I'm not saying that elections are such exciting things, but I just have a feeling that of hope. The coming up into this year, in 2019, there's just we're starting a new year, and I think it's time when people can look at some of these issues and say, it's not hopeless.
Right.
That we can impact these issues, and that this is one of many issues, and environmental issues, or anti-war issues, or immigrant issues, things that we see in the headlines, and say, I can't do anything about that. It's just me. It's too big.
Mm-hmm.
But when we take a look at these folks, and you come to events like these, and you get inspired by people who are taking on bits and pieces of these issues, and that's the only way things get solved, is by each of us taking on a bit and a piece.
That's right.
And doing what we can, and after a while it turns out that, hey, we all got something done.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, your group after 30 years is putting on an event that is inspiring a whole new generation, and you're just
We
to
hope
be
so.
commended. It is
so.
wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
It's great work. So anyway, this is Peace and Justice Connections. Anything else you want to put in about the event, or about Cleveland School Remembers? People can join. Do you have meetings?
Yeah.
Do you want to invite people to meetings, or do you want to
we would
have
love
people
to.
come to this?
We
Or?
do want
Okay.
to invite people.
Yes.
Okay.
We are working on 3 or 4 major projects right now, and it's
Okay.
too late to get into any of that. That's for another
Sure.
show.
Okay.
But
But are you going to
so
mention them, or maybe you'll have a handout at
We're
the
gonna have a
event?
table.
Yeah.
yes,
there
we're
you
going to
go.
have a table.
Okay.
Exactly.
Very good.
So there are several different interest areas
Mm-hmm.
where you may not want to do everything that we're doing, that we're working on,
Sure.
but if you want to work with a committee that's doing something specific,
Yeah.
then that would be great. Because as I said, there is still only about 10 of us, so we can
And
use the help.
if you want to publicize your work, you
Yes.
can always write an article in the written copy of Connections,
This is
which
true.
we're putting together right now. And so if you have a PSA, or if you have a public service announcement or something like that you can put in, a letter to the editor. In fact, I'd love to, if you would, we'll have these papers available on Thursday, and pass them
Yeah.
out to folks and say, if people want to write, if they want to research, if they want to write letters to the editor, that sort of thing, use Connections, because that's what it's.
When's your
Perfect.
deadline for the next issue, or have we passed the deadline?
For you, Julie. But anyway, the next couple of days would be great.
Okay.
Because we're starting to put it. Well, normally it's the 7th of the month.
Right,
But
okay.
we're in the 14th, so But there's a couple pages that are open right now, and so normally what I'll do is I'll put stuff in that's sort of timeless at the beginning, and then hold off until stuff that
I
is
see.
more time specific near the end, just for you guys. So anyway,
Thank you, Bruce.
so thank you. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Adrian Egeland, Judy Weldon, Julie Sharp, members of Cleveland School Remembers. Again, Thursday, January 17th from 6 to 8, Stockton Memorial Civic Auditorium will be the 30th anniversary commemoration of the Cleveland School shootings. Please come. It sounds like it's going to be an exciting show and inspiring. So this is Bruce Judici, Peace and Justice Connections Radio. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.